Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Is it on? Wow. Oh, Spirit. That energy by which name doesn't matter. That energy that is all there is, that is what I call Source or God. Spirit is all there is. It is all love, all wisdom, all grace, all good, all of it. Because it's all there is, there's no spot where this energy is not. It is me. It is each of us. Each of us are good. Each of us are love. Each of us are wisdom, grace. You can put the words you want on it. Each of us are these things, full of potential. And on this Easter morning, things are hatching. I choose to see and celebrate the good that is hatching in my life, in the many ways it is hatching. Choosing to celebrate the love in my world. Opening my arms and saying more. Choosing to celebrate wisdom and the ways it shows up. Oh, apparently another opportunity for wisdom. Choosing to celebrate ease and grace. Today I know I'm choosing to celebrate something surprising. Don't know what got planted, but I know that when it grows today, I'm going to be grateful for it. I am eternally grateful for the good in my life because I know I planted it. I am grateful for that awareness. So I let my word float gently into the ground, into the soil of spirit, so that it may grow more good, because that's the way it works. And I am so grateful for the knowledge of the way it works, for the knowledge that I am growing. Each of us is growing and learning. Each of us is spirit here in this world to grow and learn. That is what love looks like. And so it is.
So it's good to see you. It's wonderful to see you here. Thank you for being here. Our theme for this whole year is called A Grand Rising. We have been invited to a grand rising, to a greater expansion of consciousness. And this whole month we've been looking at the idea of that's how we've never done it. Isn't that a great idea? You know, we hear all the time, well, we've always done it that way. It's like, no, we're going to do stuff that's not how we've ever done it before. We had a whole different service. We did completely out of the box from what we normally do in that. So today's, our final theme for this month is don't go back to sleep. Don't go back to sleep. And it comes, of course, from a poem from, I'm just getting back into speaking again, so it's might not all come out right. from the wonderful Persian poet, Sufi poet Rumi, who says, "The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep." And I love this poem because it's layered. It's layered. I don't know if you caught that or not. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you is our senses. Do we pay attention to our senses? When we open, the windows in the morning, do we really take a moment to look at what we're looking at? Even if it's the building that's 5 feet away from our window, do we take a moment to really take that in with our senses? Do we take in life with our senses? And he says, you must ask for what you really want. That's our heart. What do we really want? Not the little, I like to call it squirrel from that movie, the little attractions that catch us here and there, and gotta have that. But no, what do I really want? What does my heart really want? So that's the heart energy. And so finally, people are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. This is our spiritual side. This is our spirit crossing over. We live in two worlds simultaneously. You're aware of that. And do we have that door? Do we recognize that door is round and open and we can move back and forth freely and to not go back to sleep to that idea? So this invitation of not going back to sleep is oft repeated by spiritual teachers. They recognize we have openings and then we have closings. We forget. I read a few weeks ago the wonderful essay by Howard Thurman, the wonderful theologian, who said, it's a poem or essay about keep fresh before me the moments of my high resolve. Those high visions that I have. And he talks about how the dust and the grit of the journey can wear us down, can make us forget our highest visions. And so to keep fresh before me my highest resolve, those moments of my high resolve. So I'll circle back to this in a little bit, but first, let us talk about Easter. I just had a person ask me, in our teaching we talk about Christmas means this. What the heck does Easter stand for or mean in our teaching? And I said, I got to talk about that. So first of all, those of you who have been here for a while know, because I talk about this every Easter, that the word Easter actually comes from the name of a fertility goddess named Esther. Yes? From which we get estrogen, from which we get all that stuff. And it's a fertility goddess based on earth-based religions. And that's why we have chicks, that's why we have bunnies, that's why we have eggs, and all those wonderful fertility symbols, is because that's what this is really about. Is fertility, is spring, is the bursting forth of this. It's a celebration of spring. And the name, of course, was usurped by the Christians a long time ago for the holiday that was formerly known as the Resurrection, which is celebrating the alleged raising of Jesus from the dead. Ooh, did he say alleged? Yes, he did. There's 20-some of you who've been receiving my Lent messages for the last 40 days that I did. And you know that for the last week, I've been on a bit of a tear about to debunk some of the legends and mythology of the New Testament, and especially around this Holy Week events. Not only the writers of the Gospels, but those who have come after, who've been interpreting the Gospels without understanding their references, without understanding their symbology, and like the Gospel writers themselves, stretching obscure passages from Isaiah and others in an attempt to prove that Jesus was indeed the authentic, long-awaited Messiah. And you might say that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were Jesus' marketing team. And you have to be careful about marketing teams. They get wild ideas. Oh, Sandy, I'm so sorry. I forgot that you were probably watching this. Our marketing committee chair. And so the gospel writers were trying to market Jesus as the Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah for the Jewish people. What's ironic and funny is that many Christians today look at the Old Testament, particularly Isaiah, and say, see, Isaiah predicted this, that was going to happen from a long time before that. not understanding that the gospel writers based a whole lot of the gospels on what Isaiah would said the Messiah would look like. This is sort of like discovering this fabulous set of movies called the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They're wonderful. They got the Messiah, Frodo Baggins, here to save the earth. Look, there was a prophet before that named J.R.R. Tolkien who predicted all this would happen. Not recognizing that the movie is based on the book. Now we can just take those writings and throw them out. I did that for a while in my life. It's very cathartic, by the way. Everybody should throw out the Bible teachings, not necessarily physically, but the Bible teachings at some point for a little while in their life. But there's a deep wisdom there. There's wonderful ways of expressing it along with powerful metaphors that help us to see and reveal the hidden truths when they're properly understood, instead of as being literal facts, but rather as mythopoetic archetypes. That's a couple of big words for you. Mythopoetic archetypes to help us to see how those archetypes work within our individual and collective psyche, providing us with a deeper understanding of ourselves. If we take it and understand it from that perspective, we get a different story. So let's look at this resurrection story again. And the first thing to recognize is that there are, well, first of all, within the New Testament, there are five different resurrection stories, and they all conflict with each other. Right? Anybody read those? They all, Jesus met different people, was seen by different people. They all conflict. But more importantly, there were other resurrection stories that were going on throughout the Middle East and the Near East, far earlier than any of the writings in the Bible. So many of these were explanations of the renewal of life at springtime, often with a female goddess resurrecting or pulling out from the underworld or from the dead. They're either dead or living in the underworld consort to bring them back to life, which we find echoed in the women at the tomb when they find this tomb empty. And the return of life was considered an activity of the divine feminine. Yes? So this story is not new. This story is not unique to the Jewish culture. And remember, this is a Jewish story written by Jewish storytellers for a Jewish audience about a Jewish Messiah that they were championing as the Jewish rabbi. This guy, Jesus. And it's funny because, as I said, the stories kind of conflict. Mark is the original gospel writer. He's the earliest of the gospel writers. And his story ends with the women come to the tomb and find it empty with a young man in a white robe sitting there and says, he's gone. He's not here. There's about 12 more verses after that come that were added much, much, much later. Every Bible scholar that I know says, no, Mark ended at verse 8 in chapter 16. I know all of you have your Bibles handy and you pull that. Okay? So 10 years later, Matthew comes along, and a young man in a white robe is not good enough. He now has an angel in a glorious robe, white as light, blah, 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 all that stuff. And Luke comes along a few years later and has two angels. And so, as to quote J.R.R. Tolkien when he described the Lord of the Rings, this is a tale that grew in the telling. So we're dealing with that first of all. But more importantly, the more important question to ask, rather than all the details, rather than the factuality of it, I don't care if it's factual, it's what can I learn from this? What does this mean to me? How does this story apply? These are the real questions to be contemplated and explored in any mythopoetic archetypal story. Not getting caught up in was it real, was it accurate, or whatever. So let's play. Let's explore for a moment, okay? We're all God in form. Yes? Nudge your neighbor. Say, you're God in form. By the way, so am I. We're always one with the oneness. We are always, as Buffy said, there's no spot where this oneness is not. So we're always one with the oneness. This is why when Jesus talked about the kingdom of God, he would say it was here, it was at hand, it was within. It wasn't off in some far-off place out there, up there, some other future time. It's now, here, because it's the only time. We have a visitor that I just met whose name is pronounced today. And I love that because it's always today. Michael Beckwith says tomorrow is just more of God's today. It's always now. That's the only place that infinite presence is. So the resurrection for and within us, because that's where it's happening, is the arising of the awareness of the infinite presence. I'm going to call it God, but not that big guy in the sky sort of thing for those of you who are new here. But this infinite oneness, this infinite beingness, this infinite power, presence, love, joy that is. It's the arising of the awareness of that presence within each of us, the human individualized God. We have this human individualized experience, this Son of Man experience, as Jesus called it, arising into full awareness of the Son of God consciousness, which we also have. We are both the sons and daughters of man and the sons and daughters of God. Sons and daughters of the human, sons and daughters of the infinite. Yes? Yes. If you're not sure, trust me. And if you don't trust me, you'll find it out yourself anyway. We are that. And so this resurrection is arising into full awareness of the transcendent God, the God of the universe and beyond, the God in which there is no death, only eternal life. See, death is an idea and a perception of the limited mind, the limited perspective, the material level of consciousness, the human level of consciousness, where it seems very real, but there is a bigger picture if we can touch it. We are more than just the physical body that, gets born, does all its stuff and falls away. You and I are more than that. Yes? You know that. You wouldn't be sitting here if you didn't know that. That which dies, the belief in an individual self separate from the infinite and immortal self, must be laid in a tomb, must be crucified, must come to an end. It must die and reawaken into full conscious awareness. The Buddha, when he was asked in his time after his enlightenment, I hear the Buddhas. When he was asked, which Hindu saint are you the reincarnation of? And they gave him a list. Are you this? Are you this? Are you this? He said, no, I'm none of those. I am awake. I'm not a recreation. I'm not a reincarnation of the past. I am something new. I'm something fresh. I am awake. And each of us has that potential to be awake in this moment, in every moment. The resurrection, the rising, is rising into the state of awakeness. The crucifixion, the torture and death, occurs as the separate self, the ego that believes that it's separate from, clings to its self-importance, to its self-identity, hanging on tight. Anybody besides me? Okay? Clings to that self-identity as the real identity. It's real. No, it's really happening. And it must collapse and dissolve like the caterpillar for new life to emerge. The caterpillar doesn't dissolve willingly, does it? When these cells that want to form into the butterfly first come, the internal immune system of the caterpillar does everything it can to destroy those cells quickly. The problem is the cells keep on coming, and it can't. It gets overwhelmed. It's interesting that the earliest versions of this resurrection story say that Jesus was raised. Not that he did it himself, but that he was raised by something greater, which is not some big guy in the sky, some anthropomorphic God up there, but the higher level of consciousness, which is always pushing against us, which is always calling for its expression, which is always attempting to raise us, and would if we weren't going kicking and screaming down the path of transformation, as the song goes. It's constantly trying to evolve the sleeping self, awaken the sleeping self, guide the awakening. Once the resistance of the limited self gets crucified and dies. Now, this all sounds very dramatic, doesn't it? This all sounds like something for some spiritually enlightened being. I don't want to go through this. We don't need it. I'm just a normal guy walking the street, right? Gal walking the street. But the truth is, most of us have experienced crucifixions and resurrections in our lives already. Yes? Okay. We've had health crucifixions. We've had money crucifixions. We've had loving relationship crucifixions. We've had career crucifixions and deaths. And then we've had resurrections from all those. Yes? So this is not something unusual. You know, for those who know me, I've talked about my own journey with the ending of my second marriage. Some of you have heard this ad nauseum. In which my limited ego perceived that other person there as my source for money and the success of our ministry. It wasn't my ministry, our ministry. And in order to let go of that limiting and inaccurate view, I had to go through being tortured and crucified. It was ugly. It was painful. Mel Gibson could have made a beautiful movie about the passion of the David, you know? Or maybe we should have had the other Mel Brooks, direct that one. But it took that whole pain and suffering process for me to break out of not only that marriage, but the false ideas and limitations that were embodied within that marriage and within my perspective of what ministry looked like. So that I could be resurrected, raised into a more authentic ministry and life. You have experienced the same thing at some point in your life, somewhere in your life. As we recognize that this resurrection story not as something that happened to some guy 2,000 years ago, some special guy 2,000 years ago, but rather something that, like spring, occurs over and over and over again. Our renewal, our growth. Some of it is very dramatic with lots of crucifixion. Some of it is just as simple as the buds start blooming again after a winter in our lives. It occurs for each of us on a regular basis. It supports us in letting go of our layers of resistance, our layers of what Don Miguel Ruiz calls our domestication, our old beliefs that keep us limited. It's part of our process of growth. It's part of our evolution and ongoing awakening, and we can let go of the guilt and the shame that we might experience. Oh, I shouldn't be going through this crucifixion experience. What is wrong with me? Especially if you're a religious scientist like we are, especially if you're a practitioner, and especially if you're a minister. You should not be going through this guilt, shame, right? Hello, we all are going through this. We're all human. We can let go of the feeling like we did something wrong, or there's some God out there who's testing us or teaching us. Since there's only one God, who is God testing or teaching? Itself? That's you and me. We're all in the very natural process of awakening or reawakening to the truth of our nature as God. That is our purpose. That is our process that we're doing. We're awakening, we're remembering who we really are. This process takes letting go of old ideas that limit us. No matter how attached we are to them, no matter how real they seem, and they will, to our ego. Because you see, we can't have a resurrection without a crucifixion. We can't have a spring without a... We can't have an awakening without having been... You know, there's an old blues song that says, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. So we have to do this awakening process. We have to go through this letting go process. It just seems to be the way that we, on this planet, in this form, grow and awaken. And we start to say, oh yeah, this is just natural. This is just who I am. This is just what's going on. I welcome this. And I look forward to a greater awakening. And then, of course, we get the challenge and the call. Don't go back to sleep. When we wake up, don't go back to sleep. So this week, I invite you to ask yourself, where am I being called to a more full, more expansive awakening? Buffy up here said, and where am I not being called to? Yes, sometimes that's how it feels. And what is it that must die off so that this awakening can happen? What is it that I know I've needed to let go of for a long time, that I've been putting off, and finally it's so in my face that it's just like, okay, it's time. And it may feel painful, it may feel frustrating. You know, one of my old patterns is belief in helplessness. You know, it comes from my very early childhood, learned helplessness. And as I've been dealing with this illness, I noticed that it's been triggering that off for me. Oh, I'm helpless against these allergies and this process and like that. It was finally just a couple days ago I went, yeah, there's no kids in the room, so bullshit. BS. Belief system. That's all that I'm facing here. That is not the truth of God, therefore it is not the truth of me. I am not helpless. I'm the power of God in form. And I've noticed that after I started contemplating that, this thing has started to dissolve more fully. I've got the best voice I've had today that I've had in 2 weeks, and I feel better. So what must die off so that this awakening can happen? And am I willing to say, like in the story, not my small self's will, but thine, my larger self, my higher self's will be done? Would you be willing to play with that spiritual practice this week?
Yes.
Where am I being called to a fully more expansive awakening, and what is it that must die off, and am I willing to let the higher will, the higher idea come through me? I'm going to close with a quote that's a little poem from Mark Nepo, who I love. It's called Being Here. Transcending down into the ground of things is akin to sweeping the leaves that cover a path. There will always be more leaves. There will always be more leaves. And the heart of the journey, the heart of our awakening, is to discover for ourselves that the leaves are not the ground, and that sweeping them aside will reveal a path, and finally that to fully live, we must take the path and keep sweeping it. And so we have an affirmation to remind us about that. So say this with me. I am willing to be raised up where I belong. One more time. I am willing to be raised up to where I belong. And so it is. Thank you.